not engineer. It's technician.
Technician.
Boy, it's a big difference.
No, you said engineer.
No, I didn't.
No, okay. Technician. Did that job make you feel more relaxed about responsibility, like, dealing with it, or did it teach you responsibility, or did it show you already had a sense of responsibility?
Oh, I already had that.
Can you ask that? Because this whole thing, you made a quick jokey reference to taking care of the world earlier with your mother, but now you're here in a ship. There's a whole ship in peril, and you're okay with it. The officers are freaking out, but you're just going through the motions.
No, they weren't freaking out. They were just a little tense about. So what is going on? And they were just watching and listening, and they were quietly there.
How did your time in the Navy influence your outlook on life, or what you wanted to do with your life? Did it change it?
The biggest change came from reading some books in the library.
Really?
So the Red Cross had a practice of.
Hang on, I'm sorry. You moved, so I'm going to have to zoom you out a bit.
I did what?
You moved. Terrible.
I moved.
No, you just. Please re-ask the question. I'm sorry about that.
What did you read? What books did you read?
Well, one thing I read in the very first camp we were dumped on some small island. It was what the Navy called a receiving ships, but it was a land-based camp where they bring people into that are up for reassignment someplace, and then when requests come from some naval pipeline, we need 2 cooks, or we need 2 different category people or something, that then they would be shipped off that place. So and then wandering around there, they didn't have anything to do all day. It was right in the middle of the jungle. It was really interesting. And I ran across this native hut, and a lot of the native huts were on stilts to keep it off the damp ground and like that, and a thatched roof on top, and a ladder up to it, and a sign said Red Cross Library. So I climbed the ladder and looked inside, and it was all so neat and clean, and nobody there. I assumed it was okay then to go in, so I went in there, and I went back to visit it quite often. But one of the things I found in there was a Life magazine, relatively recent, that talked about a scientist, a man who'd been the scientific advisor to the president during the war, whose name was Vannevar Bush, and they described the proposals as he'd been making about something he called. It's funny, I've forgotten the name.
Mimics.
Oh yeah, he called it the Memex, MEMEX, and it was a way for microfiche, which were little frames of microfilm that could hold pages, photographic pages of things. So it's one way to store information. And he said, to find a way on some fiche to say a reference, and there could be a reference coded in there that if you then sort of did something about responding to it, it would go and find that other fiche it's represented and put that there. So they were the very first ideas about what's now links. And so he's credited with doing that concept. And I thought that's fascinating. But I don't know how long that stayed with me. It is, but many years later, when 1960, 61, 62, when I was working very hard on that solid paper about augmenting the human intellect, I remembered that then and went and found it, etc. like this. And I really to this day don't know whether by then I'd already thought of having links a computer could follow, or did I get the idea and remember it from him as stimulated. But anyway.
Yeah. What else did you read about in the library?
Oh boy. Then when I got my final base, I remember finding a book about William James, the philosopher, and I just was fascinated with that.
What was it about?
William James is an early philosopher, early American philosopher. And just to be reading about...
Can you really ask that question? Because you said a book about William James, and you said, what is it about? Obviously, that's not what you meant. But it's not
Right.
the whole
I thought
thing.
it was by William James.
No, it was about him.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so if you just ask about the other book, sorry.
I just asked the question again. What else did you? Sorry, what else did you read? The library. We can cut this.
Oh. Well, one of the books that was very interesting for me was about William James, the early American philosopher. And I was just so intrigued by the kind of deep scholarship on the kind of topics they were talking about, what philosophy was, and how he, the story about how he made an impact, etc. And somehow I'd heard the word philosopher, etc. before, but people who were really studies of philosophy hadn't sunk in. But that was just really good. And then there was another one that was one of these kind of, I guess you'd call it cheap self-help books or something. It was called Making the Most of Your Life. And that really intrigued me, just all the things about saying, well, if you set a goal, why not go after it? See, and things like this, and a whole bunch of very pragmatic kind of suggestions about making the most of your life. And that intrigued me, and I kept checking it back out from the library, and then I noticed that there were almost no other personnel ever showed up in that library. It didn't have a librarian there. It was sort of, on your honor roll about checking things out. And I realized, and so when I was being sent home, I actually performed a crime. I stole that book.
The self-help book?
Yeah.
Really?
Took it with me. And I'm sure it had a lot of effect.
Yeah. What else did it say besides,
There's a lot of pragmatic things talked about your own attitudes.
What the shoot from the sample on the chairs, Lizzie? I'm ready for you people.
What else did it say besides?
Well, it's sort of like your own attitude can make a lot of difference. That if you approach something, whistling and something like that, versus approaching it all concerned and worried, it would just make a difference. A lot of just pragmatic sort of ways in which the psychology of your venturing and such would make a difference. And that book, I think, probably gave me a kind of an interesting focus that really changed my life.
Yeah.
A country boy had never heard of these kind of things, and in spite of the continuing guilt about stealing the book, I didn't really feel very guilty, because as far as I could tell, nobody else was reading any of those books at all in there. But here's an example of when I get back at school in college, and boy, it had been a 2-year gap, and meanwhile there were young kids that had been there and gotten those 2 years, and this was a continuation. And of course the campus was flooded with returning veterans in various stages of how much they could remember about what they'd had before. But so I remember that it was also so crowded that there were classes would start at 7 o'clock in the morning on out until 5 or 6 or 7 in the evening. And so my first electrical engineering, or junior electrical engineering course, was a kind of a critical thing. And after being back for some weeks, they were going to have their first midterm quiz. And it was a 7 o'clock class. And in Oregon, nothing surprising about it being raining, but walking to that, and at 7 o'clock it was dark and raining, and slopping along through the street all by myself going to this class. And I thought, oh, gee. And all of a sudden I thought about that book. Just approach it. Oh, it's straightened up. Put my hat right. And started whistling. And we got an A on the test.
Really?